Now, joining me now, I called you a psychologist, but of course, Stephen Farah, that's not entirely the correct term to use.
Thank you, Mongani. Yes, I'm not a clinician. I'm a researcher and a scholar in the area of psychoanalytic psychology.
But particularly you focus on Jungian studies.
Yes, that's right. That's my area of speciality.
Give me a broader then explanation as to how you interpret the world of psychology.
Well, my specific area of interest really is depth psychology, and that is specifically around the idea of the influence of the unconscious mind, that the conscious, explicit personality is an aspect of the psyche, of the psychology, but that certain events, certain acts are motivated by the unconscious.
Now, you would have heard from much of what's happened today that, of course, there was a lot of focus on exchanges between Oscar Pistorius and Riva Steenkamp, text messages between the two of them in a relationship, and really, without putting too fine a point on it, not really the picture of a loving couple as one might have expected. Now, you talk about things not being done consciously. I mean, how do you then interpret all the information that's come out of court this afternoon?
Well, Bangani, from a psychoanalytic perspective, it's often what is not being said that is as interesting as what is being said. And I think that looking at the messages that were read out in court today, there is definitely, I guess, some areas of concern for Oscar Pistorius and for the defense team. Some suggestion maybe of insecurity, of possessiveness, maybe of his being overly controlling. One or two things in particular I think were of concern. I think Riva's statement that at times she feels afraid or she feels scared of him, that for me was a red flag. That's something that would be of real concern. I found, sorry,
no, go on.
I found as well, I found the comment that Oscar made about having been hungry and tired, and using that as an explanation for what I guess was some sort of untoward or abusive comment, interesting as well.
Also, silly or these seemingly silly things like accents and voices being annoying. Riva having to almost apologize for his own assumptions, mistaken assumptions. At one point she says she's sorry that he thought she was flirting with a friend's husband, and she's making the apology towards him.
Well, I think it's not entirely untypical. I mean, I think that one sees these sorts of exchanges in a romantic dialogue, so I wouldn't want to maybe read more into it than I believe one should. But prima facie, I do think there is cause for concern. There definitely, you get the impression that he was possessive, and that he was not shy about expressing this, and it was clearly placing some strain on the relationship. Going on those messages, in any case, that were presented, which is all we have to go on, I think there are some areas of concern there.
Now, you would have heard John discussing with Rahima Hessop that, of course, in fact, the state was at pains to contextualize all of this by saying, well, 90% of the text messages they were able to retrieve indeed portrayed a relationship that was loving and stable and all the good things that one might expect of a couple recently in love. How does that place then these comments or these other messages?
It provides a context, I suppose, but I'm not quite sure how helpful the context is from Oscar's perspective. The point is that these messages were exchanged, these sentiments were expressed. From a psychoanalytic perspective, they're clearly indicative of a sense of insecurity, a sense of his being controlling, some sort of strain in the relationship, or fear, as I say, I think is noteworthy. And so, yes, it may be contextualized within a lot of loving messages, but nevertheless, a moment is all it takes for things to go wrong, as we unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, given the state's version of the kind of, I suppose, character that they've been trying to present of Oscar Pistorius and the various witnesses that they've brought, we've heard, of course, about guns being fired at a restaurant, through the roof of a car. Now these messages are coming up. We've heard the idea that when he was fearful, he would load his gun and be ready to deal with whatever dangers he perceived he would be facing. What does all of that tell you? I mean, I understand, of course, very important to make sure that we understand that the defense is going to contextualize all of these things. But purely in what the state has presented, what kind of picture is emerging for you as from an analytical point of view?
Bongani, I think from what the state has presented and also from some of the reports that have come through in the media, both prior to the trial and now during the course of the trial, I would interpret, I think the events are largely consistent with an interpretation which suggests that there may have been some sort of psychosis at play in Oscar's behavior, what I would term a gun or a murderous gun complex. And what I mean by that is, I mean, one sees that he came from a family that were very passionate gun collectors. He himself was a gun enthusiast. I believe he had 6 licenses for various firearms pending at the time of shooting. He was a regular goer to shooting ranges. All of this is suggestive of the constellation of a complex, which is just an unconscious motivation in his psychology. And then when we see incidents, these incidents, about the reckless and inappropriate discharge of the firearm, both at the Tasha's restaurant and through the sunroof of the car. And then I think there was also reports of a tweet where Oscar came home and he talks about hearing some domestic appliance and going into full combat recon mode and sort of stalking around the house in the belief that there was an imaginary intruder in the house. This, for me, from a psychoanalytic perspective, is a red flag. I think it's suggestive of the fact that there was as I say in psychoanalytic terms, what we refer to as an unconscious complex motivating his behavior and becoming increasingly irrational and increasingly dangerous.
Would you accept that even if you say from his own version that on the particular night he thought that there was an intruder, he thought that Reva was in bed and went to go and confront the person that he believed was in the bathroom who presented a threat to himself? Would his version then fit in with what you're saying?
Yes, I think it would. I really do. In other words, what happened on the evening in question, if we accept Oscar's version of events, was once again an imaginary intruder as he had encountered previously in the house. It's really, really hard, I think, for us to believe that he was acting, even accepting his version of events, that he was acting reasonably and that he was acting rationally. So even on his version, I think it's suggestive of the fact that he was maybe not in full possession of his faculties at the time.
One of the things that we've heard, particularly, legal eagles speak about, this concept of a reasonable man, and saying that those are some of the tests that are going to come into play. From what you're saying, a reasonable man may not be, the same in the same way, at least from individual to individual.
Well, what I'm saying is that I think there are certain times when one's capacities and one's faculties may be diminished. And I think that's not an uncommon legal defense when we talk about a crime of passion or temporary insanity. And this is suggestive of the fact that at times, particularly of heightened emotion, or any time when consciousness is lowered, that the unconscious has the opportunity to erupt into consciousness and to effectively motivate what in other circumstances wouldn't happen. I mean, just going back to the issue of the SMSs that we're speaking about, Oscar makes reference to, I was hungry and tired, and he uses this as a kind of an explanation for presumably what was some sort of unpleasant exchange between them at the time. And that is very much how the unconscious operates. It operates at times of stress, fatigue, times when you're not completely lucid.
Well, one would only, of course, wonder what stress he must be under right now. Stephen, thank you very much for your perspectives and your insight. Well, that's it then for this hour. After the break, David O'Sullivan will be joining me. Remember to continue to share your thoughts with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and WeChat.